Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week, is America doing everything it can, at least everything it should, to help the people of Ukraine? Russia's offensive is meeting fierce resistance, but is Western support enough to save a nation? Also, legislative stonewall in two capitals, Washington and Jackson. President Joe Biden tries to resurrect his congressional agenda, while in Mississippi, American rescue funding has become a bargaining chip in the stalemate over income tax elimination. Two Mississippians with key insights are here to discuss these topics and much more. Gregg, Harper, and Nathan Shrader join me now for Mississippi Insight. Let's get right to introductions. Joining us by Zoom this morning, Dr. Nathan Shrader is an associate professor of government and politics at Millsaps College in Jackson. He heads the American Studies program there. Nathan, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you very much for having me back.
And Gregg Harper is here, the Republican from Jackson and Rankin County, served as Mississippi's 3rd District Congressional Congressman for 10 years. Gregg, welcome back to Mississippi Insight.
Byron, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you again and with Nathan. I know that it may be confusing to folks to see, a Democrat and a Republican actually getting along well as friends, and so we're thankful for that.
Gregg, let's begin with you. What are your initial thoughts on this conflict 3 weeks after Putin's invasion began?
I have to tell you that what's going on in Ukraine is just heartbreaking and gut-wrenching to see the devastation, the deaths, the loss of life of innocent people, including women and children. It's unacceptable to see what the bully Putin is doing in Ukraine. And are we doing everything that we should be doing? I think there's much more that can be done. We've got to speed up the timeline to get weaponry, sophisticated weaponry that will help them. We really should be allowing some fighter jets to be brought in that have been offered through Poland. And those are things that we need to do. I mean, I have to believe that Putin is very stunned right now that he just didn't walk in and that he wasn't received with open arms. I think he's been living in a little bit of a dream world. The folks in Ukraine do not want him to come in and run roughshod over the country. And you can only just hope and pray that the resistance will continue and that Russia, through Putin, will be unsuccessful.
I look at with great admiration on the courage of the people of Ukraine, their leadership, primarily President Zelensky. And I also think that if we look at what we're seeing in the United States today, we're seeing people put aside some of their other partisan or ideological differences to recognize and respect the kind of courage that we're seeing people demonstrate. I think it tells us that we also have it within ourselves to come together and get beyond some of our political problems that have plagued us. Now, Byron, to answer the other part of your question, no, I don't necessarily believe that we've done everything we can. I do think the $13.6 billion that was part of the the budget package is going to be directed towards Ukraine. What did Everett Dirksen say? $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and eventually you start talking about real money. That's real money. That's going to have a significant impact. But I agree with Gregg that there is more that we can be doing. I'm probably in the minority here in the United States, at least in terms of the polling right now, that I believe that we ought to be taking a slightly more outright position towards telling Vladimir Putin what he is and is not allowed to do and not letting him drive that conversation. I think that's something we have to be very careful of. Are we letting him dictate the terms of what we do in response? But again, there's a lot of nuance there, but those are my initial reactions.
And Dr. Shrader, you mentioned that $13 billion that they're spending, but the congressional spending package, you mentioned that $3.5 billion that will pay for anti-tank and anti-air missiles, firearms, body armor, ammunition, and much more supplies headed straight to the Ukrainian military. By most accounts, the Ukrainians have shown what they can do with that sort of supplies and munitions. But talk about the calls from the political left and the right in America to do more to help the Ukrainians.
Look, the article that most moved me in terms of my thinking on this was a piece in the New York Times a couple of days ago by former United States Senator Joe Lieberman, who back in 2004, I supported to be our next president, but it didn't work out. But he had a tremendous piece where he tried to explain the difference between this kind of no-fly zone that we keep hearing about that would be too adversarial, right? That some are in the Biden administration are saying that, where he was talking about carving out a humanitarian-driven no-fly zone that would have specific opportunities for us to help evacuate civilians, get food and other supplies, medical supplies and things to the people that need it there. I think that is something that we could get both sides in Washington together on, and we could get the American people probably to come together in support of that with the humanitarian focus that would avoid escalation.
Congressman, does that very risk prevent a broader U.S. or NATO involvement in this conflict?
Well, certainly Putin wants us to be afraid that if we really push back, that he's going to do something serious. Well, this is as serious as it gets. And when Nathan was discussing a no-fly zone, and I understand it's very complex, but I can't give great grades to the president on how he's handled this so far. Remember, a couple of weeks before the invasion began, he said, well, maybe if it's just minor and a minor incursion, well, no, that's a violation of somebody's sovereign borders. And so we still continue to fumble the ball and not send the right messages here. Look, the only thing that we know is that Reagan was right, peace through strength, and we still need to look a little stronger, a lot stronger than we're coming across here on the national stage. And don't forget that this is not just about Russia. The number one spectator right now, and maybe more than a spectator, because I'm sure they are involved with helping Russia, would be communist China. And what does this mean for Taiwan and the rest of the world? So it's a serious matter, and how we handle this.
All right, we're going to take a short break here and talk about congressional politics with Mississippi Insight continues. I am back with Gregg, Harper, and Nathan Shrader. I want to take you back to early March when President Biden delivered his State of the Union address to Congress. He announced a 4-point so-called unity agenda in this new push for bipartisan legislation to curb the opioid epidemic, provide greater support for military veterans, address mental health, and, as the president put it, to end cancer as we know it. Dr. Shrader, isn't all that a tall order given some of the big failures of Build Back Better and other setbacks for the majority of Dems in Congress?
It certainly is a tall order, but I want to mention two things briefly about this. First, this is what State of the Union addresses, regardless of who the president happens to be at a given point in time. This is what they tend to look like, right? They're very aspirational. They're wish list driven. I'm not such a fan of that format as a real political realist. That's not my preferred format, right? I'd like to see a more from any president. This is not just about the current one. Maybe a brief list of here are the things we think we can legitimately accomplish in the next year, and here's how we're going to do it. I think the public would benefit a little more from that, but that's just not what these speeches have become. So I think his speech was pretty standard from that perspective, but I also think you saw a political pivot in some areas there. You heard fewer of the items coming off of the Bernie Sanders and AOC checklist, and more things that are kind of coming from the more moderate or centrist coalition within his party in the House and Senate as those items. Byron, just the items that you mentioned there were not so much partisan or ideological ones. They were ones that could be talked about kind of anywhere in America. For example, the cancer moonshot, as the president called it, he can go into any state in the country and really talk about that without it having any partisan edge to it. And I think that was something they were trying to achieve heading into the midterm election season.
Congressman, it's hard to deny that congressional Republicans have played a smart hand in blocking some of these initiatives that they oppose. Do you think voters will reward them in the midterm congressional elections later this year?
Well, and I think that is a misconception to say that Republicans have blocked initiatives. Last time I checked, the Democrats have control of the House, and they have effective control of the Senate, with the vice president able to break a tie vote. So that's look, the president does his State of the Union address, and to say it's his unity speech is the biggest stretch you have. What is he going to do about inflation? I don't know of a single family that's not impacted by the rising costs of groceries and certainly at the pump. I mean, it's unbelievable. I've never in my life paid $4 a gallon or more for a gallon of gas until recently. And what does the president do? He says, well, it's Putin's fault, even though we only import about 3.5% at the most of our oil and gas from Russia. We shouldn't have to import any. So if the president really wanted to unify the country, he would have to offend some of his own House members. And that would mean to show that we're going to get back to business of going after our own oil and gas and our own natural resources that we have. We were basically energy independent just 15, 16 months ago, and all of that has changed. So we have a lot of things that we can do. And here's what's going to happen is this administration has certainly not been centrist. They have not tried to unify or govern from the middle. They have gone and governed from as far left as they can. And I believe the voters realize that. Generic polling certainly favors a Republican, which is very rare, but they do significantly at this point. So I don't think that there's really any prognosticator who's not saying that the Republicans will get control of the House. Kevin McCarthy will be the next speaker in all likelihood the next time the president gives the State of the Union address. And what margin that will be, we don't know. The Senate still needs to be determined. I do think the Republicans will take control of the Senate by a very narrow margin, could be 2 or 3 seats, but it really depends on who do they nominate on the Republican side for some of these critical swing Senate races. But I think it's going to make the country better to have that divided government next year.
Dr. Shrader, do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I agree with the part of the assessment is I think the Republicans are certainly favored. I think they're going to win the House, and I agree that they likely will end up with, in my view, a narrow Senate majority. But the part that I have to push back on a little bit is I do think there are certain things the Biden administration could have clearly done differently in terms of messaging what it's trying to do. But a lot of its big ticket items, if you look at the polling on these, the individual components of the Biden agenda, individually, they're quite popular. What the administration has not succeeded at, Byron, is trying to roll all of those elements of their plan together to try to say to the American public, this is it as a package deal. That did not work, which is like the Congressman said, that was Joe Manchin and some other Democrats, I think, tried to send him that message.
Straight ahead, we'll circle back around to state politics and the legislative feud over tax elimination. It's Mississippi Insight only on WJTV 12 News. We want to spend some time on state politics with our two guests. There's a lot of grumbling going on between House and Senate leaders on moves to change our state's tax structure. Speaker Philip Gunn is leading House Republicans on pushing for income tax elimination in Mississippi. They've even threatened to hold up about $1.8 billion in American Rescue Plan funding. Over in the Senate, Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann has expressed grave concerns about such a delay. He cites the huge needs in Mississippi to shore up water and sewer systems, fix roads and bridges, expand broadband access, and much more. And there are federal deadlines on the ARPA money. Congressman Harper, you first. Is Speaker Gunn overplaying his hand, or does he have the political wherewithal to push income tax elimination through the legislature?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, how much I respect Speaker Gunn and Lieutenant Governor Hosemann. At the end of the day, they want to try to do what's best for the state of Mississippi and for her people. And they have obviously a difference of opinion right now as to how that should be done. And look, we've still got time to work through this. They're both smart, dedicated, reasonable people. So I want to give them an opportunity to work through all of that. Keep in mind that this is a historic time for Mississippi. We've never had more available cash in the state than we've got right now, whether it's federal money coming in from ARPA, whether that is just exceeding revenue projections. So I'm optimistic at the end of the day that they'll reach some type of agreement. that will mean that the cities, counties, the state will be able to get the $1.8 billion in ARPA requests, ARPA money. Requests obviously are more along the $9 billion range for that $1.8 billion that's available. But they're good projects to consider, and I think they'll work it out at the end of the day, Byron.
Dr. Shrader, your thoughts? Has Speaker Gunn overplayed his hand, or does he have the wherewithal to push it through?
Well, look, I think somewhere in the middle between the position of Lieutenant Governor Hosemann and the Speaker is probably where we're going to end up. I would disagree that that's necessarily a good thing for the people of Mississippi, but I think we're going to get something passed here. I'm rather alarmed, though, as I look at what's going on at the Capitol, especially over the issues pertaining to this tax cut. I think what we're seeing, it's amazing to me that we're stuck on this tax cut issue, that it's almost a fetishization of who can cut the most income taxes and how. It's an absurd thing to me because it comes at the expense of so many urgent needs that we have in this state, things that we could be spending money on to improve the quality of life of people in Mississippi, improve Mississippi as a whole, but also, as Lieutenant Governor Hosemann pointed out the other day, and he is no tax and spend leftist, warning that the state could lose that $1.8 to $2 billion in American Rescue Plan money if it's not acted upon. There's only, I think, 4 other states, maybe 3 other states that have not acted, and we're one of them. We've got to do that. We can't risk losing this money, but I would say at the same time, we can't risk this massive tax cut that the Speaker is proposing, because from the numbers I've seen, that would essentially be what a third of the state's overall general fund slashed. Once that's gone, it's gone. And I'm not exactly sure what land of make-believe, fiscal make-believe he's living in, but I hope he enjoys it there. But because it's not realistic and it's not good for the state at all.
Let's note that neither the House nor the Senate tax plan as they stand now are exactly like Governor Tate Reeves' own tax proposals. He is a fervent supporter of income tax elimination, though. Does he have the clout to dictate changes on tax change deals coming out of the session? Congressman, begin with you.
No, look, I think that certainly Governor Reeves is watching what both the House and the Senate will do. At the end of the day, he also wants to do what's best for the people in Mississippi. And remember, the money that's available comes from taxpayers, and so that is something that we consider. It's not government is what removes money from the citizens, and so we want to look at the end of the day what's best for Mississippians, keeping in mind that this is a very difficult time. Families are paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars more per month than they were paying just a few months ago.
And Dr. Shrader, your thoughts on this? Does the governor have clout on this issue?
I think he does, but I think at the end of the day, you look at, we knew this coming out of the previous governorships and at the start of this one. We live in a state where the lieutenant governor has an immense amount of sort of policy clout in terms of what can be shaped through the legislative process, as does the Speaker. So I think really they're the key actors to be watching right now. But I would also add that right now people are struggling, as the Congressman said. I certainly wouldn't deny that. And I think there's a path forward on some of this, and it's to leave the income tax alone. There's not a sufficient way to make up for that revenue. But I think if you want to help people right now in a time of this terrible inflation, what we could do is eliminate the sales tax on groceries. Don't make it a gimmick that's part of the larger package. Just do away with it. We're one of 2 states in the country that impose that at the full rate. I think it's just us and Alabama at this point. Let's just eliminate that. That would be something that would be a direct net positive almost immediately for every Mississippi household, no matter what they spend every week on groceries, because that hits them directly every time they're at the grocery store. So I think there are ways to do tax relief that are sensible, and it's certainly not the elimination of the income tax, which, again, from a policy standpoint, has just seems to be awful awful idea all around.
Congressman, your thoughts on the total elimination of the sales tax or the grocery tax?
Well, first of all, every time we go to the grocery store, I guess everybody would like to have a little relief. But at the end of the day, I do have confidence in the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker that they'll be able to work through this over the next 2 weeks and come up with a plan that works, that everyone can rally around. And I really believe they can do that.
All right. Congressman Gregg Harper, Dr. Nathan Shrader, it's always a pleasure talking with you both, and a lot of good information coming out of you on this insight, and good to have you back.
Thanks, Byron.
Thanks for having us.
Gregg Harper, Nathan Shrader, we appreciate you this morning. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown from all of us here at 12 News. Make it a great weekend.